want to talk to you about words in context, which is one of the categories of the SAT reading section. And it's one that a lot of people misunderstand. I have students and parents often asking me what the best lists of vocabulary words are. And, to be fair, there are some ways in which vocabulary lists can be helpful in the SAT reading section. I mean, ideally, you have a decently strong vocabulary from your years of being a great reader. But, if that's not the case, certainly it's possible to study some lists and grab a few extra words. But it's important to pay attention to the title that the SAT uses to talk about these questions. They don't call them vocabulary questions. They call them words in context. So that name suggests that there's something about the context in which the words are used that could help a student make a choice, even when we don't know the definitions of some words. That's what I want to focus on today. So a few notes about words in context, a few introductory ideas. First of all, look for clues in the sentence. I don't want my students to be simply reading the text and hoping that the right answer just occurs to them. I want them to be actively looking for keywords in the text that demonstrate what might show up in the answer choices. Okay, so we'll look for clue words in the text. That's the first thing. The second thing is structural language, and this is something that I talk about in the reading section all the time. So maybe you know what I mean already. Structural language is a set of words that show you the organizational pattern in sentences or in paragraphs. So words like but, however, therefore, yet, rather, hence. There's a whole lot of these words, and these words can make the difference between really understanding what's being said in a certain passage and not really understanding what's being said in a certain passage. Okay, so pay close attention to structural language. The third thing is prefixes and suffixes, and this applies to answer choices. What I'm talking about here is when you're looking at some words that you don't know, you can recall things that you've seen in other words, little beginnings of words and ends of words that make a huge difference when you're sort of 50-50 between a couple answer choices. So prefixes and suffixes can be a great place to trim away an answer choice. The next thing I want to talk about is active translation. What do I mean by that? I mean that you should be taking sentences and making sure that you can reframe them in your own way. You can rephrase the sentences. Be able to explain in your own words what's been said on the page. If you can't do that, then you don't really understand the sentence. And the last thing that I would suggest as a strategy in the words in context questions is to pick your own word or phrase, even if it's clunky, even if it's inarticulate. Pick your own word or phrase that could go in the place of the answer. Once you've done that, and you couple that with good clue research and an analysis of structural language, you should be in position to make a good choice. And if you're down to 2 answers after all of that, then don't waste too much time. Just make a choice and move on. Now let's look at some examples of these questions. All right, so before we get started, I want to give you a brief programming note. We're only going to be looking at the hardest questions here. And you'll be asking why. Why not look at some medium level questions or some easy questions to get the hang of things? Well, you can do that on your own. I don't think that there's anything wrong with focusing on those questions. But I do believe that looking at hard questions presents us with a great opportunity to focus on strategy. That is, on an easy or a medium question, you may know the answer without having to be disciplined about your approach. So the things we've talked about, the strategies that I've mentioned, I think focusing on difficult questions gives you the best opportunity to hone those skills and to not rely on your intelligence to answer the questions in a more intuitive way. So that's why we're looking at only hard questions. And we'll start here. Some economic historians blank that late 19th century and early 20th century households in the United States experienced an economy of scale when it came to food purchases. Let's hit the pause button and let's just think about what that says. Some experts think that during a certain time period, households had a certain experience. Now, this is a difficult phrase when it came to food purchases. Experience something when it came to food purchases. It's okay to not fully understand a phrase. Just flag it. Now, after a long dash, oftentimes we'll get an explanation. They assumed that large households spent less on food per person than did small households. In other words, you don't have to know what they mean by economy of scale. You can look at what comes after that long dash and be clear about what an economy of scale is in this context. So essentially they're saying you got a bigger family, it's cheaper per person to feed a bigger family than a small family. Economist Trevor Logan showed, however, now there is a key structural phrase, that a close look at the available data disproves this supposition. Okay, so let me show you the key words here. There's a word supposition, and I'll even point out the word this, which is, to me, a little bit of an indicator. So when we use the word this, of course, we're referring backwards to some word or phrase that's been used earlier. That's a demonstrative pronoun, words like this, that, these, those. Well, in this context, I don't see any other place for the demonstrative pronoun to be referring to. So what is this supposition? Well, I guess, okay, here it is. It's the assumption that they've made. And indeed, what is that assumption? Who is they, right? They is the group of historians. Okay. So the historians assumed, I believe, is a nice word or phrase we could even put in there, right? So notice what I've done. I've got my structural language. I've got a couple of clues or keywords here, and I've put my own word in the place of this blank. I think the word assumed or supposed would be a great word here. Now, I know that isn't my own phrase. You could say that they've hypothesized, but that word doesn't feel strong enough. Now, you shouldn't waste a lot of time in consternation, really trying to come up with the perfect word or phrase to go in the place of this blank. You should be using clues and coming up with some idea of what should go in there. And I've done that now. So let's go through the answer choices and cross off things that aren't close to assumed or supposed or even hypothesized. If you don't know any of these words, of course you're in trouble, but you probably do know some of these words, right? So let's skip the first two, which are probably the most challenging words on this set. And let's say that question does not mean the same thing as assumed. In fact, it's quite the opposite, right? Let's also point out that the word regretted does not mean the same thing as assumed or supposed. Okay, so now we're down to these two words. Now, if you don't have any idea about these two words, you should guess between these two answer choices. The purpose of this method is not to make sure that you get every single question right. It's to make sure that you get all the possible points available to you with good strategy. So there may be some limits to your vocabulary, and if that's the case, I want you to use these questions as an opportunity to improve your vocabulary in an extraordinarily focused way. So if you don't know these words, certainly we should learn them, right? But the word surmised has something in common with supposed, and indeed this is the right answer. If you're stuck between these two and you have no idea, That's okay. One more thing to say. Let's say you know one of these two words. Let's say that you don't know the word surmise, but you've seen contrived in some way. Maybe you've seen it said that somebody was behaving in a contrived way. What that means is they've sort of crafted something, some way of behaving. They've sort of created it. And that's not precisely what we want here, right? So if you know 3 out of 4, it's just as good as knowing all 4, because process of elimination, eliminating 3 answer choices correctly, is the same thing as having picked the correct answer. So there's an example. I'll move backward. There's one question earlier in my document, and it's this one. So let's read through the question, and let's hit the pause button as soon as we come to the end of a clause. Okay. Rejecting the premise that the literary magazine Ebony and Topaz should present a unified vision of Black American identity. Okay, there's that comma. I'm going to pause, and I'm going to analyze what I have here. So far, what we're saying is that whomever we discuss in the next clause rejects the idea of a unified vision. Right? That seems like the key phrases. This person rejects the idea that the magazine should be unified. Okay. Charles Johnson fostered his contributors' diverse perspectives by promoting their authorial autonomy. Some good words in there. So, diverse perspectives. It's interesting the way that works with unified vision and authorial autonomy. Now, if you don't know the word autonomy, you should add that to your list of important words on the SAT. If it shows up in a question, you could say that maybe it won't show up again. Certainly, that could be the case. But they don't pick from an unlimited number of words. They have a sense of what words they feel like are on the edge of a high school student's vocabulary, and those are the words they want to test, right? So it is possible to study a list of these words, but I think it's better to just create your own list. What words do you come across, both in your own reading as well as in the study of the SAT, that you don't know? You should have a running list of those words. That's an important method to just being a good reader. But in this case, to get back to this question, the first sentence is said that Charles Johnson rejects the unified vision, and he fosters the idea of diverse perspectives and authorial autonomy. Even if you don't know autonomy, you probably could make sense of that. This guy's against a singular sort of viewpoint, and he wants diverse perspectives. Okay, so Johnson's self-effacement, another great word, diverged from the editorial stances of these two gentlemen whose decisions for their publications were more. So I want to now circle what I would call a bit of structural language, the word diverged. That really makes a difference to me, because the word diverged suggests that Johnson and the other two gentlemen are in disagreement about something, or that they don't see things the same way, right? So Johnson wants diverse perspectives. He rejects unified vision. These two, W.E.B. Du Bois and Alain Locke, forgive me for my bad pronunciation. But these two gentlemen are going to be the opposite. Their decisions for their publications are more, you could say, singular. That's not a perfect word for it, but that's my attempt to create something, or maybe unified. Now, not in the sense that the two of them have exactly the same vision, not that they are unified, but that they want their publications to be more cohesive, right? And their decisions were more maybe strict, right? So I think really this is the best word that I've come up with here, strict. Okay, so now I look through my answer choices. Again, we don't have to know all of them, but let's talk about some ones that we do know. perhaps we know what proficient means. Skillful, right? Done at a acceptably high level, or at least an acceptable level, acceptably skillful, right? Most of my students might struggle with one or both of these two words, but most of my students will have seen the word pretentious, right? So if you know pretentious, it comes from the word pretense, which means like sort of in advance, right? But pretentious usually means to be sort of snobbish, right? So unpretentious is not snobbish. And that's not precisely what we're looking for. So we're in between these two words. I think the word ambiguous is maybe one of the most used and challenging SAT words. It's not one of the most challenging, but it's one of the most used of the challenging words. It's a word that many of my students struggle with and many students come across on the test, right? So if you don't know either of these words, then yeah, we do have to make a choice between these two. And that choice may be not totally clear. But maybe you've seen the word dogma. You know, sometimes it comes up in a religious context, religious dogma. Or maybe you've seen words like ambidextrous, right, which has a little similar prefix to the word ambiguous, or at least a similar root word. So ambidextrous means, you know, both hands, dexterity meaning hands. Ambiguous means maybe a lack of clarity between two things, right? It really means something is unclear, but you could say maybe both. Maybe it's hard to see which of two things is true, right, or is correct, right? We don't want their decisions to be ambiguous. Their decisions should be clear and strict, right? And again, if you've associated dogma with sort of religious rules, then perhaps you would be able to make the connection between my word strict and the word dogmatic, right? That's a challenging question, but there's a lot there. Now, if you were lost after two answers, let's say you got rid of A and D, that's okay. See what you can learn about the words we've underlined and circled here, as well as the answer choices. Any of these words that you don't know, of course, you should add them to your list of words that you should come to know. That's a great way of studying the vocabulary section of the test. Okay, here's another vocabulary question. So we'll do the same thing. Let's read the first sentence and pause to understand what's been said. Economist Marco Castillo and colleagues showed that nuisance costs reduce charitable giving. You saw that I kind of jumped past this parenthetical phrase, the phrase locked inside these long dashes. So nuisance costs reduce charitable giving. Okay, so some fee, some cost lowers the amount of money that people will give. Now we define nuisance costs, the time and effort people must spend to make donations. Okay, so now I've actively sort of broken this sentence down and now actively translate it. The amount of time it takes folks to make a decision about donations lowers the amount that they ultimately give, right? So they get a little bit exhausted and maybe they give less money because they're busy trying to decide where to give the money. Okay, so the next sentence, charities can mitigate, there's probably the first challenging word, mitigate this effect by compensating donors for nuisance costs. Let's pause there. There's a comma. Even if you don't know what mitigate means, obviously this is a bad thing, right? Lowering charitable giving. From the perspective of the charities, that's a bad thing. And if you compensate the donors, then you lessen that bad thing. So with context, you can figure out, you can surmise what the word mitigate means here. Lessen the effect, right? So the effect is that they give less. So if we mitigate that effect, it means people are going to give more. But those costs, that is nuisance costs, though variable, meaning changeable, are largely blank donation size. Well, here's a key structural word. I'll use a different color. So means cause and effect. One thing happened, so we did another thing, right? It was nice outside, so I left my jacket at home. Cause and effect. Okay, so let's think about this effect that comes after the word so. Charities that compensate donors will likely favor attracting a few large donors over many small donors. Okay. The costs are largely blank donation size. So something about the donation size. Therefore, the charities will favor attracting big donors over small donors. Okay. So the costs of charitable giving. Let's look at these options. And it might make sense to just break this down and say, well, what do these options mean? Supplemental means in addition to. Predictive means it, if you were to look at the nuisance costs, you would know what the donation size would be. Independent of donation size, that would suggest that the costs do not have an effect on donation size. And subsumed means sort of swallowed up, right? Sort of that the donation size swallows up the costs. Okay, this is an extraordinarily challenging question. But that last phrase says that the charities, when they compensate donors, will favor attracting a few large donors. So if they do this, they're going to favor attracting large donors over small donors. Okay. There's one other word I want to point out, a structural word, the word but. So they're lessening the effect by compensating donors for nuisance costs. But those costs, though variable, my goodness, more structural language. Though variable would mean that they change. But though shows a contrast. So though variable, I'm going to get rid of supplemental and subsumed in. Why? I'm getting rid of supplemental because the fact that they vary and the fact that they're supplemental do not have any sort of contrast. And subsumed in, same thing. So now I have predictive of or independent of. These are very, very different, right? If the costs are predictive of donation size, then the amount of those costs can tell you about the amount of the donation. And if they're independent, then that's not the case. Well, if they are predictive of donation size, then certainly we would see some relationship between the different size donors. But we see nothing in the text that suggests that these nuisance costs vary directly with size of donation. In fact, the phrase though variable would suggest that we're not trying to show that they vary, right? The costs, they vary, meaning the cost could change. But if we're trying to use a structural word like though next to variable, I believe that we're saying that the variability does not predict anything. Therefore, we're using independent of. That's, again, one of the most challenging questions you'll see on the test. If you feel like that was too much, it's totally okay. You don't have to get every single question right to get a great score. What I hope you will see here is the way that I've used structural language to parse the most important parts of this question. Right? So I hope that helps, and we'll keep moving. The next question begins right here. We have some good words here. Sometimes I like to look at the answer choices and review what the options kind of are, to see if there's any words I don't know or words that I feel strongly about. There's a couple words that are harder than others, in my opinion, here, like repudiates and recants. I think those are harder words. I'll talk about the meaning of them when we get to the answer choices, but we'll start by reading the question itself here. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Okay. So, a director, Seminole Muskogee director Sterling Harjo, blanks television's tendency to situate Native American characters in the distant past. Okay. Here's the word this. This rejection. Okay, I think I have everything I need now. I've mentioned this to you before on a different question. When I see a demonstrative pronoun like this or that or these or those, oftentimes it's referencing back the very word that we're looking for, right? So we're looking for something that means rejection. So he rejects, he goes against, he dislikes, right? If you proclaim a tendency, you're just saying that tendency out loud. You're either proclaiming that it's good or bad, but you're just making a claim. You can see the word claim there, right? And you can use the prefix pro to say, okay, we're not going against a claim, we're making a claim. Foretells, you can see sort of like the word before, right? Or foreshadowing or forecast, meaning sort of looking ahead. So is he looking ahead about this tendency? Certainly not. So now we're down to 2 words. And it could be the case that you don't know either of these words. I still think you can make a choice between repudiates and recants. Okay? So let's talk about what's the same. Of course, the first 2 letters, that re part, right? Repudiate looks a lot like reputation. And repudiate means something to do with lowering someone's reputation. So to repudiate is to scold or to look down on or to reject. It's really a great word for that. Recant, you can see, think about words like incantation. Think about if you've ever been to an old-fashioned service in a religious tradition. Maybe you've seen a cantor, which means a singer. So you may have seen that part before. To recant means to say to take something back, to sort of unspeak it, right? To disclaim something that's previously been said. To recant a statement simply means that you take the statement back, right? That's not what we're saying. Repudiates, I think of reputation with this one, as you heard before. So if you don't know a couple of those words, add them to your list. But notice the use of the demonstrative pronoun this, and then the clue rejection. That was the key element of this question. Okay, here's the next one. In this text, what does the word contracted most nearly mean? So notice I didn't read here because I saw I was being asked a specific question, so I went and read it. What does the word contracted most nearly mean? Okay. So I know all these words, and you probably do too. Restricted, described, developed, and settled. This is the first one in our so-called difficult set in which you probably know the words, all of them. I mean, maybe you're the exceptional student that knows, most of the words we've seen so far. But I'd say that I'm on solid ground to say that most of us will know most of those words, okay? That doesn't mean that the question is easy. Right? So let's see. He had traveled, Mr. Brooke, that is, had traveled in his younger years and was held in this part of the country to have blank, a too rambling habit of mind. So here's our key phrase. Too rambling. Now that's definitely a bad thing. Okay. His conclusions were as difficult to predict as the weather. Okay. So something bad. Doesn't mean that this word itself is bad. Restricted a too rambling habit of mind. Well, if you restricted that, that would be a good thing, right? Restrict a problem, to limit a problem. That's not what we want. If he had described a too rambling habit of mind, then it's not that he himself has a rambling mind. It's that he is able to articulate or depict that habit of mind. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying that that habit of mind is his. Developed a too rambling habit of mind. That sounds pretty good. It means that he's, over time, something happened to him. And to have settled a too rambling habit of mind would almost be to have resolved it, if you think about it in context, right? To have settled a habit of mind would mean maybe to have eliminated a problematic habit of mind in this case. So I don't like that one either, and I'm going to circle developed for that reason. So again, you saw me engaging in a process of elimination and looking for keywords, and this type of question where they're not just asking us to fill in a blank, but to replace a word that remains in the text. Context was entirely crucial to making that decision. So let's move on here. Okay, so here's another of these types. By the way, as we go through, you'll see kind of a mixture of these different types. I suppose this is like the first type, actually. Right? This is one where we have a blank and we fill it in. Now, just to be clear, some people think that you can avoid doing the reading and just focus on, the sentence that our word resides within. But this is called words in context because we have to focus on the context. Okay? So we don't know if the context up here is going to be important or the context down here is going to be important. I will say the presence of a colon gives me an indication. Look, it wouldn't be much of a problem or a problem at all for you to have read the first sentence. But a colon is an important indication to me. It tells me that what comes after the colon should explain the statement that comes prior to the colon. So if I focus here, the sounds produced by gyros can differ based on the distance between the ridges. Okay. Can differ based on the differences between the ridges, the types of stroke a player uses, and the thickness of the gourd. So we have a list of elements that can cause a distinction or a difference in the sound. Right? The sound can differ based on three things. Okay. So feel free to go back and look for other context, but based on that, I think we want a word that are highly changeable. I know that that's a very inarticulate way of, filling in this blank, but I'm trying to demonstrate a method, right? If I was writing this sentence, I wouldn't use the word changeable, but I'm trying to move at a reasonable pace and have an effective, if not eloquent, word for that space. So I think changeable. That's not overlooked. Changeable is not powerful. Changeable is certainly not routine. Changeable is variable. Right? The sounds are variable, and then we describe what we mean by that. The sounds can differ based on these different things. Right? There you have it. I'll move on to the next one here. Okay. So once again, I'm kind of scanning the paragraph looking for any indication of what I should or should not read, but we have one big sentence, so the colon question that we just saw is kind of a rare situation. So I'll read the whole thing and I'll pause after each clause. In studying the use of external stimuli to reduce the itching sensation caused by an allergic histamine response. Okay, so somebody is studying how external stimuli, What does that mean? Sort of things from the outside, some sort of feeling coming from the outside can lower the amount of itching that you feel from an allergic reaction. So they found that while harmless applications of vibration or warming can provide a temporary distraction. Now, the key word here, I know it's easy to get kind of stuck in the details of a science passage. The key word is the word while. We're going to see a contrast between these two statements. Harmless applications provide a temporary distraction. Such blank stimuli offer less relief than a stimulus that seems less benign. A very key word here, like a mild electric shock. If you don't know what the word benign means, that's perfectly okay. A mild electric shock is certainly less nice, let's put it that way, than vibration or warming, right? So you may have heard that word in certain medical contexts. The word benign means not bad. It means harmless, okay? So, but even without that, you can surmise that a mild electric shock is worse than warming, right? Even though, look, this is the reason this is hard is it uses the word mild, right? So when you see mild, you think not bad. But a mild electric shock is certainly not as nice as warming or vibration. In most contexts, I'm sure that the clever ones among you can come up with clever retorts to my statements, but take it for what it's worth here. Okay, so such, I want to point out the word such is like a demonstrative pronoun, like this or that or these or those. So such stimuli, that is the stimuli we just talked about, which are more benign than the less benign electric shock. So more benign, such harmless. Sorry for my bad handwriting, but that says harmless. Okay. Harmless. There may be some words you know and some words you don't know here, but deceptive certainly doesn't mean harmless. Novel certainly doesn't mean harmless. Novel means new or interesting or different. And impractical doesn't mean harmless either. So maybe you didn't know the word innocuous, but if you followed along with my analysis of the structural language, words like while, words like such, and then the clue, which was less benign, if you followed along with that context, you would probably agree with me at that last step that, if you granted that the word harmless was a good match for what we wanted, that none of the other ones mean harmless. And innocuous certainly does mean harmless. If you didn't know that, that's perfectly okay. Add it to your list. You can think of words like inoculate. What does it mean if someone is inoculated against a disease? Usually it's by some sort of, a vaccine or something like that. To inoculate is to cause someone to be exposed to the disease without being harmed by the disease, right? So, but even if you didn't know that, you could get the answer, and that's the power of good structural analysis. Okay? We'll move on to our next question. Okay. So I do want to point out one thing about this question before we jump in, which is the prepositions of, with, and toward. That could be, it might be helpful. It may be the case that one of these words is tempting, but with the preposition doesn't make as much sense to you. I'm not sure yet. We'll take a look here. I am seeing this word however, which certainly is going to be key. That's that structural language. And the word while here. So when there's multiple bits of structural language, we saw this back on the question a few questions ago, where we had the word though. I'll show you which one I'm talking about. It was this one. So on this one, we saw the word though and the word but sort of in short order, and then the word so. When there's lots of structural language, you're going to have to be really disciplined to see the relationship that that evinces what is the right answer of the question. So let's pay close attention to what happens in each of these phrases. So while scholars believe many Mesoamerican cities influence each other, so we're going to see some contrast with influence. Direct evidence of such influence is difficult to ascertain. So people believe something, but they don't have lots of evidence to make this certain. If you don't know the word ascertain, I totally empathize, but you could also see that the word certain is in there, and it's not uncertain, so it must mean, something to do with certainty. Ascertain means to like confirm. Okay, so they think there's influence, they don't have evidence. However, maybe we're about to get evidence. Recent excavations in a sector of Tikal unearthed a citadel that shows, not Guatemalan architecture. Right. I paused there because I had to process what we were talking about. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word that takes the place of Mexico. But look, the previous sentence said Mesoamerican cities influence each other. And here we have two different areas, Guatemala and Mexico. We see an influence, right? A Guatemalan citadel that shows, I think influence is the word we want here, right? We're looking for something to do with this word influenced. And I think we get it. So if we look a little bit further, we will see more elaboration. A near replica of a famed temple, tangible evidence of outside influence. So I think we're looking for influence. Shows that, so let me put my own word in here. Recent excavations that shows clear evidence or a relationship with or a similarity to. Those are all phrases I'm looking at. Refinements of, well, that would mean to make it more clear, more detailed. We're not saying that they're refinements of or improvements upon the Mexican architecture. We're talking about sort of a similarity with. Precursors, that word pre there lets you know we're talking about before. We're not talking about well, hold on, I actually won't cross that off yet. I'm not totally sure that that's wrong yet. But it's not animosities towards, right? That would mean to have animus is to have sort of feelings of aggression towards each other. You can think of animal as opposed to human, right? So I know that some animals are quite nice and cuddly, but the word animosity comes from the idea of sort of a lower level of relationship, sort of an inimical relationship, right? And sort of enemy status, if you will. Okay, so we're in between precursors and commonalities with. I really like commonalities with, but I didn't want to cross off precursors first because sometimes when I'm down to two answers, I can notice something more clearly. Like maybe what we're saying, if it were to be B, I'll tell myself what I would expect, which is to say that the Guatemalan stuff came before, precursors of the Mexican architecture. But I know that that's wrong based on the fact that the Guatemalan citadel is a near replica of a certain Mexican temple, right? So that doesn't make sense, and there's C. Look, I just had some humility about the end of that question intentionally. I haven't done this question before, but I have looked at enough SAT questions to have confidence that I can show you patterns when I see a question in real time. Right? And that's what I want for you as well, right? So, you might be asking, wait a second, you haven't gone over these questions before you're recording a lesson about them? Indeed, that's the case on some of these questions. but I have a lot of confidence that that method will provide you with more knowledge than if I had these questions memorized. At times, you'll see me working through this material the same way I want you to work through this material, right? That's what it means to have mastery over a certain method, is to be able to employ your knowledge in a new situation, right? To have remembered the mistakes that you've made in the past in order to overcome those mistakes. That's what mastery is. Having sort of overcome all of your normal mistakes. That's why I didn't pick an answer before I dispelled with any possibility that the word precursors was, a good answer. So, okay. We'll move on to the next one here. Okay. Here's one I have done before. Full disclosure. Doesn't mean I remember what the right answer is, though. We all have better things to do with our time than memorize answers to SAT questions, I hope. If not, then work hard on the SAT, get into a great school, and then you'll have more interesting things to do with your time than memorize the answers to SAT questions. Okay. So we'll read the first clause. Whether the reign of a French monarch such as Hugh Capet or Henry I was historically consequential or relatively uneventful. So let's pause. We're saying, regardless of whether their time in power was historically important or actually not very important, not a lot happened. Its trajectory, the trajectory of their reign, sort of the shape or arc of their reign, was shaped by questions of legitimacy. Okay, so that means whether or not they should be allowed to rule, right? Legit means sort of, what's a good word for legit? Maybe good and, let's start with positive, negative. Legit is good, right? So questions of goodness, right? So whether or not it's good. Legitimacy might mean validity, or defensibility, right? So we have questions of whether or not these guys should have been in power, right? So the reign of those people was marked by whether they should be in power. And therefore, here's a key structural word, therefore cannot be understood without a corollary. Corollary means correlate, or things that go together. Understanding of the factors that allowed the monarch to, I think maybe like keep or defend. Again, apologies for my sometimes rough handwriting, but defend is a good word there, right? So you saw when I broke things down, by the time I got to that blank near the end of the sentence, I had a sense of what should go in there because I paused a couple times. I understood the arc of the statement. Right? So if you're with me to that point, let's continue. If not, feel free to rewind to the beginning of this question and go through it again. But I think defend or keep is a good word there. So now let's move on to our answers. To disengage does not like defend or keep. To annotate, also not like that. So by the way, again, if you don't know a word, you break it down. Engage, sort of touch or lock, to lock onto. Disengage would be to unlock or to separate from. Annotate, you can see the word note in there, or notate. Annotate means to sort of like, do the kind of things that I am already doing here. So that's not the same as defend or keep. And then we have these two words. Now, maybe you don't know either of these words, and in which case we have to break things down. Maybe you've seen the word reciprocity, meaning something that is exchanged, right? A sense of giving to others what they have given to you, right? If you haven't, then maybe you can think of in architecture the idea of buttresses. In Gothic cathedrals, they have so-called flying buttresses. And what are those things? They're support, right? So to support his right to hold the throne, that's a way better match than to reciprocate or to like give his right to receive the throne. So reciprocating, if kings were to reciprocate each other, that would be something like, hey, I think you should keep your kingdom and I'll keep my kingdom. That would be a sort of reciprocation of their rights to hold the throne. It's not really what we're saying, though, and there wasn't really much of a sense when I looked at my clues that reciprocate matches keep or defend. So there we have it, buttress. So if you're going to study architecture, you'll hear more about buttresses in college. And if not, that's okay. When you get it down to two answers, you're trying to use every bit of knowledge you have about stems of words to make smart decisions, even if it's not obvious which answer is right. So let's keep going. Okay. So we have two sentences here. We also have a colon. So the colon comes much later, not right after our word. So it'll probably matter a lot when I get there. But I'm still going to try to understand the rest of the text before I get there. Critics have asserted that fine art and fashion rarely blank in a world where artists create timeless works for exhibition and designers periodically produce new styles for the public to buy. Okay, pause. Critics are saying that there's sort of a gap, that these things don't go together, right? Because artists, there's this word timeless versus periodically produce new styles. Right, so we're showing a contrast between fine art and fashion. Luis Sueño, Shoshone Bannock. They always pick some names that are challenging for a basic dude like me. This person challenges this view. Okay, so this is really the key. This view is going to show something like the opposite of what goes in the blank here. Her work can be seen at the Met and purchased through her online boutique. Okay, so this is the opposite of what we're looking for here. So they rarely go together. They rarely go together in a world where artists do very different things than designers. Okay, prevail means to win. If you didn't know that word, that's okay, but it means to win. Succumb means to essentially give up or lose or give in. Rarely diverge. Now, this is a tempting answer. It means the opposite of what we want. I mean, if you got rid of the word rarely, then diverge would make some sense, that is, they split apart or do not stay together. But rarely do they go together. So we want a phrase like go together. Intersect would mean sort of collide or come together, right? So again, highlighting key phrases. That's how we play this game. Okay, so that was a set of, this page says number 11, which usually indicates to me that we've done 10 of these questions. So we've done 10 of these questions. This is a good time to take a break, to come back to this work when you're fresh, right? We've spent a good amount of time looking at these words in context. I encourage you to continue to do the rest of the questions. I'll be with you for the rest of the questions, but this is a good moment to pause and to maybe go outside and touch grass. Okay, best of luck studying for the test, and I hope to see you soon.